Hello, welcome to AT&T ThreatTraq for May 13th, 2014. This program provides network security highlights, discussion, and countermeasures for cyber threats. Today I'm joined by Jim Clausing online. Welcome, Jim. It's good to see you again.
Thanks. Good to be here.
We have here in our lobby area John Hogoboom, and John, you've been busy getting malware samples and things like that. How's that coming?
Oh yeah, well, on a regular basis, tens of thousands on a daily basis, or at least weekly for sure.
Yeah, good deal. We have a returning guest here today, Dave Gross. It's good to see you again.
You too. Thanks, Brian.
And we have also here Stan Nurilov. Stan, you've been busy digging into the malware. So what John helps us capture, you help explain.
Yes. Well, sometimes I have to bounce it off of John too.
Right.
But I'll be talking about something interesting today regarding that, actually.
Yeah, I'm sure you will be. All right. Well, thanks, guys, and welcome. I'm Brian Rexroad, and let's go ahead to the first story here. And Dave, you brought this up. I guess we've been kind of following this a little bit for a week or so now, and it's new malware associated with Android. What can you tell us?
It turns out that researchers at Bitdefender has found a strain of ransomware that is on Android devices. So, we've seen ransomware before on PCs and stuff like that. Now it's starting to come onto the Android devices. And what it does is it comes and pops up over top of the main screen. And you can push the button to return to the home screen, but within 5 seconds it pops up again. And the screen that pops up is a warning basically saying that you've visited a pornographic site that, doing illegal type of pornography, and you need to pay some sort of a fine before they'll release the device back to you again. And it also claims that it encrypts the device. Now, it turns out it doesn't actually have the ability to encrypt the files on the device, but it claims that anyway, so it scares people there.
So it's really a facade.
It's a facade, yeah.
Okay.
But as these things have evolved on the PC, they'll most likely evolve on the Android devices as well and get more complex and more sophisticated.
Right. So this is a case where the malware is loaded from, where did it come from?
Well, what happens is the user browses to a site, in this case pornographic sites, and it automatically gets downloaded onto the device. And it portrays itself as a video viewer for advanced content.
Okay.
And so the user gets tricked into clicking on there to say, yes, please install this on my device.
Okay, so it's being installed as an app, so it's not really doing an exploit against the device, it's just doing sort of the social engineering thing.
That's right.
It sounds like it's side-loaded.
It's side-loaded. It's not on the Google Play Store. It comes from these other sites. So you have to have side-loading enabled, and the user has to actually load the software. Has to bring it on there.
Okay. All right. Well, good. Now, this is obviously a lot of the same kind of deals as before. I guess, first of all, you don't want to be going to sites that are going to be giving you a bunch of garbage, right?
Right. But there's nothing about the underlying software that ties it to pornography. It just happens to be that this is where they've applied it to. So as this evolves, it's likely that it can come up on other sites that maybe you browse to, some of these watering hole attacks where you think you're going to a legitimate site and this thing pops up, and for enhanced ability to interact with the site, you can get the software. So it's not necessarily tied to pornography.
Right. Well, I guess so along those lines, you're going to make sure that you're going to reputable sites before you're willing to agree to install applications from those sites, right?
That's right.
Very much the same tune as we've seen before.
I would imagine that the pornography aspect is probably just to embarrass the person into maybe, being complicit in paying the ransom, so to speak. If I was going to a regular, legitimate site, what the heck is this? I'm not going to do this. The other thing I thought was interesting about this one is it has geolocation. It uses the geolocation to tailor the language. I don't know if we mentioned that or not, but that's an interesting aspect of this one, which you don't see that often, especially in the mobile space. We've seen it in other spaces, but I don't think I've seen that in the mobile space before.
This one's kind of cute in that it claims that it'll turn you into the legal authorities in whatever country you're in if you don't pay up.
That's right.
Right.
And most of the antivirus software that runs on the devices is able to pick this up now.
Okay.
And you can actually remove it without the help of the antivirus devices. You just have to be kind of quick to get into the home screen and then swipe it off, delete it before it gets covered again.
All right, good. I think that's a very unique sort of twist on things, something that certainly people will want to be paying attention to. And I think it plays into this BYOD situation where you want to make sure that you have good security on devices, partitioning associated with devices in an enterprise environment. So,
right.
All right, so let's go to Jim on the online here. And Jim, you were explaining to me earlier a little bit about the different versions of Windows 8. Maybe you can help explain it to others as well. Hopefully I'm not the only one that didn't know this.
Yeah, the landscape for Windows 8 has actually gotten kind of confusing here in the last month or so. There are now actually 3 different versions of what we call Windows 8. There's Windows 8, there's Windows 8.1, and there's Windows 8.1 Update. And the Windows 8.1 update first got rolled out last month on Patch Tuesday. And one of the things that Microsoft said was to get any future updates to 8.1, you were going to have 8.1 update installed. However, they immediately ran into some issues in enterprise setups. 8.1 update broke the ability to communicate with the WSUS servers for applying patches in an enterprise. Now, they have since fixed that. They did that about the 18th or so of April. But there have been folks who have had difficulty getting 8.1 update installed. So just yesterday, they announced that they pushed back the deadline 1 more month. So the patches that came out on Patch Tuesday today, you can apply to 8.1 even if you don't have 8.1 update installed. But come June, you're not going to be able to install any more of the regular patches unless you've got 8.1 update installed.
Right.
Why the different naming, I have no idea. They have managed to make this a very confusing situation. But essentially, 8.1 without the update is supposed to go out of support next month. And they'll be back to having 2 versions of Windows 8. Windows 8 and 8.1 update.
Okay. So is there a relationship between what we've traditionally referred to as service packs? Are they moving away from that terminology? Is that part of this?
It's not entirely clear to me. It seemed like 8.1 was pretty much a service pack, and why they called the next one 8.1 update rather than service pack or 8.2 or whatever, I don't really know. They've made it much more confusing here in the last couple of months, and hopefully they'll clear up that confusion going forward.
Okay.
So anyway, the real point is, those folks who were running 8.1 and were not able to get 8.1 update installed last month have a reprieve. They can apply this month's patches just fine, but going forward they will not be able to get those patches if they don't get 8.1 update installed.
Okay. Well, I guess the encouraging aspect of this is that as Microsoft, when you run into little problems like this that weren't anticipated, they're at least doing what they can to make adjustments, be accommodating of the users, and that's certainly an encouraging sign. All right, thanks for that, Jim. And next, let's go over here to Stan. And Stan, like we said a little bit earlier, you've been doing some malware analysis, found a new little twist. What can you tell us?
Yes, we did. Actually, one of the multitude of samples that comes across our desk, one of the techniques we use is to do some dynamic analysis to extract interesting indicators and help us to classify the malware. So in this one case, we found a piece that wasn't running quite right through that whole architecture, and so that required a little bit more digging into. So we went ahead, we reverse engineered it, and we found an interesting twist. What it did to disable the ability to do the dynamic analysis is it reset all the network connections. So it disabled all the network cards, waited a few seconds, and then re-enabled them before proceeding to the malicious logic. And that pretty much took away the ability to do dynamic analysis. Now, that didn't stop us, obviously. We're still able to analyze the malware and do things with it, but it is an interesting twist that I think probably more threat actors will probably adopt.
Right, right. So this is a case where if you weren't really paying attention to what's going on, just kind of running the things through, the thing would just fail, and you don't really notice that, if you had a lot of volume going through, that might happen. But since you're paying attention, we're able to pick up on this.
Yes.
And it's so in the dynamic analysis, basically what you're trying to do is use the computer, observe its behavior while it's running. Is that?
That's basically it, right? There's usually a collection script that tries to pick up the information as the sample is running, and by resetting the network card, that seems to break. So it's something to keep an eye on as a technique. I know that anti-VM tricks are used a lot, but this one seemed to be actually quite effective and quite simple.
Yeah. So you don't suppose that the malware writers here happen to have their own dynamic analysis and are perhaps checking the same kinds of things?
Well, I suppose that's what they're doing.
Right. Well, I mean, we've known for some time that they test against antivirus to make sure that they are not getting triggered by signatures, and this will be a case where they're realizing that there's, static and dynamic analysis being done as well, and trying to evade those.
Yeah. What was interesting about that sample is actually if you just use static analysis without any dynamic, without trying to run the sample, if you just looked at the strings output, actually, you got a lot of interesting information, the kind of information we'll look for in order to classify the sample. But if you try to run it, that's where the failure came in. And obviously, like you said, we always want to look at those exception cases to make sure we're always ahead or close to the curve.
Yeah. Now, this particular malware, this wasn't just your regular run-of-the-mill malware. This was a case where it's generally used to target specific organizations. Is that right?
Yeah. This is something that most people would consider an advanced persistent threat and came from a threat actor. Okay.
So it's obviously something we're going to be needing to pay a little more attention to as we go here. I don't know. Any comments from you, Dave?
No, just that it's interesting that such a simple technique messes up the complex analysis that we have, but that seems to be always the case, right?
Well, it didn't mess it up.
Right. Slow this down, let's put it that way.
Yeah. Right.
But even commercially available systems that do this kind of malware analysis broke down as a part of this process. I think probably because they're starting up and they're trying to do some packet capture, and they've got a hook into the network interface, and then when the malware drops that process that was trying to collect packets also stops because of that. And doesn't know enough to restart itself. So it's an interesting technique, and I would advise to other people out there that do malware analysis, if you get samples that look like they're doing things statically, like from your static analysis, it seems like there should be something happening here network-wise, but they don't do anything, you might want to take a closer inspection like Stan did to realize that there's more going on under the covers of this code than you expect.
What it did was it broke the dynamic analysis environments that that have hooks into a VM or into a machine that gets infected. One of our analysis environments that is completely passive wasn't affected by this at all.
Right. Yep. So I guess that's another sort of rationale behind passive analysis. I guess I've been always an advocate of passive analysis because it's one of those things that's very difficult for an adversary to even know that it's there or how it achieves its purpose. Anytime you can get to that kind of scenario, it certainly helps to provide the ability to throw an extra little twist in there. They don't really know how you detected things and how to evade it.
It's also a good reason for having multiple ways of analyzing your malware and not just depend on one tool to do your analysis.
Yep, very good. All right, so let's go on to our next topic here, smart buildings. I guess we've got more and more things connecting to the internet. We keep talking about certainly from a security standpoint, we need to be careful about that. I'm not going to say it's not a good idea. It's absolutely a good idea. But John, what can you tell us about this case?
Right. So this is an article that came out from Computer World, and it's just kind of another cautionary tale to the viewers out there about the types of things that you might get deployed inside your network that you might not even know about. So we've talked about the Internet of Things with home routers and all these other types of embedded home devices. But beyond that, this is a good example of commercial environments, buildings and whatnot for your offices that have various systems that you might not even know are connected to the internet. And whoever did connect them probably might not have advised or even communicated with your security departments or your IT departments. They might have just hooked it up because that's what needed to happen in order for them to get access to it. So, these are a couple of good examples, your HVAC systems, and that's a really good one because I don't think we talked about this, but the Target breach.
Target stores.
The Target stores, right. They seem to have pretty good evidence that the initial way in to that infrastructure was via the HVAC systems. They compromised the vendor that does the HVAC support for Target, got the login ID and password, and then they were able to remote access into those stores, and from there laterally move to other more important systems inside the company, inside their network and whatnot. So a good thing to keep in mind what you actually have exposed. They talk about a few things in here, especially with the advent of a lot of smart buildings that are coming out, where they have a lot of these things that are all integrated on the internet, available on the internet for people to make sure, the people who need to administer them to remotely be able to check how things are doing. So HVAC systems, your lighting, elevators, your building security, door access, all these are systems probably running either under Linux or Windows or some variant or some embedded device that could be manipulated. And also security cameras, DVRs, we know that they're frequently compromised in lots of cases, even in smaller environments, but as well in large environments they have a very similar type of footprint. So basically a good cautionary type of notification that you might want to do some inspection of your environments to make sure that there aren't things being exposed that shouldn't be.
Yeah, and I'm thinking also that that may not only be an avenue into the building, but for things like the cameras and stuff like that, if they're vulnerable, the attacker may want to disable it if they want to come in and break into the building.
Or the door access, if you can compromise that, there's all kinds of physical security things that could be leveraged beyond just using it as a leapfrog to get into more important systems inside the building. There was another article earlier on related to this where after the Target breach with the HVAC systems, one of the vendors, I forget which one, had done an analysis of these and found that there's some 50,000 plus of them out there exposed to the internet, some of them having no passwords or very weak passwords. So it's an important thing to keep in mind, to know what's exposed.
Yeah. I'll continue to say I don't think any system should have a default password.
Right.
There are ways around it, so that can be solved. All right, so John, you had another topic here that you wanted to share with us.
Right, this was just another story that came across the wire, talking about the insider threat. So a lot of times, especially in even our program, we talk about advanced persistent threats. Like, if Sam was doing some analysis of malware, we talk about that vector where, an outside actor is trying to breach and get into your company. But the truth of the matter is, probably more often than not, the insider threat is one of your more weaker spots than an actual outside attacker trying to get in. So this article was kind of talking about the three types of insiders that you need to worry about. So the most often, it's a negligent insider. So it's somebody who, maybe it's a developer who set up a website on the internet using real customer data as like a test beta thing that they're trying to work through, and they don't really realize that they have bugs and vulnerabilities that it's exposing this customer data. Or people who just maybe leave their laptops unattended on an airplane or whatnot, which could lead them to be compromised. Anybody sitting next to them would just plug in a thumb drive real quick and unplug it, and now the machine's infected potentially. You know what I mean? So you kind of want to keep mindful of your assets. So it's just the negligent behavior that you need to sometimes worry about. Then there's the other type of malicious insider, who's someone who has the intent to actually steal or exfiltrate data willfully. Hopefully you don't have a lot of those cases, but it's still something to be mindful of. And then you've got your compromised insiders, who are people who unintentionally become infected with some kind of malware. Their login IDs and passwords get stolen, and then from there that could allow somebody to get into the network or get access systems they shouldn't be. Long story short, the basic crux of this one is to do some user education, implement some policies. They talk in the article about trying to institute, some kind of information security management policy like ISO 27001, which is not a bad idea, but having some kind of plan is better than not having a plan at all. And I think there's always that fine balance of having a policy that's not too draconian, but is still good enough that's going to protect your assets. Because we know when you go too far to one extreme, then you get your legitimate employees that are trying to subvert the security system because it's just too complicated. So you need to be able to work through that as well as part of your policy.
Policy versus flexibility, I think, are very important balances depending on the type of industry you're in or the type of mission that you're trying to accomplish. May influence whether you need to be very stable, controlled, reluctant to say bureaucratic or policy bound, but certainly be recognizing that maybe the controls are more important than perhaps in other situations where maybe having the newest and greatest thing is the most important thing, but maybe the security controls around that are risk manageable. So I think you're right on topic with that aspect of things. Clearly, two of those are very education oriented. That is making sure that the folks that are working on things are aware of what the policy requirements are, what the level of risk the business is willing and able to accept. Whereas sort of the middle case, having an insider threat, education is probably not going to work too well, but at least having some leverage that is instilling a sense of loyalty to the organization may help in some situations. Understanding when things are not going as well as they had been perhaps previously. These are all people topics.
Right.
And we've talked a lot about social engineering and the aspects of that. That's certainly an education topic as well.
Right.
And you were talking about policies and stuff like that, but with newer technology and stuff, maybe until the organization becomes familiar with it and knows the ins and outs of the vulnerabilities with it, maybe you need lab environments that have more of a restriction of access to the rest of the environment, so that this way you're not just introducing something that can run wild through your environment.
That's a very good point, Dave. That notion of having a cloud environment where you can do, treat it as a sandbox, do some playing, or we call it play. I mean, that's techie guys, we call it play, but you're trying to develop applications and do things that are forward-looking and moving the business forward. So you're absolutely right. To be able to have an infrastructure that facilitates doing these things can help quite a bit.
And if they need data sets that are representative customer data, make sure that you have some sort of fake but good-looking customer data for real test purposes. You know what I mean? So good test, not real customer data, but test customer data.
Anonymization tools, that sort of thing.
Right.
So that really gets into this concept of big data, having the tools around big data so that you can use that data in an effective way without having to reinvent the whole topic over and over again. Very good. Any thoughts from you, Jim?
No, I think you covered it pretty well.
All right, good. So perhaps you'll have some thoughts on some of the observations we've had over the last week or so here on the internet. And first of all, I guess this isn't a new one. In fact, I elected to show 90 days of activity. This is scan probes on port 1900 UDP. John, I think you had pointed out in the past that this is one of the vectors that at least has been anticipated as a potential reflection attack amplifier. Is that right?
Yep.
It's associated with a simple service discovery protocol, which is a part of universal plug and play. I think our bigger concern here is in the context of reflection attack activity. Now, it's our belief that a lot of this sort of periodic scanning activity that's sort of stable, it's sort of the same height and has been going on for some time is associated with a sort of a good actor group looking for potential sites that might be used for this to help with notification processes and shutting down potential reflectors that might be used for DDoS attacks. But some of the more recent activity here, we see some spikes of activity. We had seen some previously from China. More recently, we're seeing some spikes coming up from Russia as well. So those are perhaps not the same. They are, obviously crossing international boundaries, not necessarily the same interest in mind as some of the ones that we're seeing. In fact, these other ones, the more periodic ones, are in the United States and predominantly, I think, scanning addresses in the United States for notification purposes. Next item here is somewhat related. Again, this one's a little bit different because it is scanning on TCP/53, but ultimately I think it has to do with looking for DNS servers. There may be another motivation, and maybe not just for reflection attack activity, because you need the UDP protocol ultimately, but usually where there's TCP/53, there's UDP/53. This may also be associated with trying to identify, basically help me Dave, the domain recursion.
Yeah. Being able to do domain transfer.
Like zone
Right.
transfers?
Zone transfers,
yeah.
right. So to get information about authoritative servers and what domain space that they're serving for.
Mm-hmm.
So that can be used in a variety of situations, and that's one possibility of what might be taking place here. Next one here is scam probes on port 7071. This particular port, I think it's actually registered to another application, but in this particular case, I think the most likely use for this port in this context, that is to be scanning for it, is probably with the Zimbra admin interface. Now, Zimbra is actually a collaboration or messaging service platform, and this happens to be the administrative interface for it. There are a lot of other interfaces. There's a web interface and message delivery interface and some others. So this is potentially looking for those types of servers, perhaps trying to get to the administrative interface, maybe to get to access to information that's being posted there. There's a good possibility somebody using this application might be, might have a collection of intellectual property, some collaboration activities that aren't open to the internet. I'm speculating on that point. But the probes here are from a single source in China, and it has been occurring a number of times, which suggests perhaps that they've had some success and are continuing with that. Now, we haven't seen a significant growth in that activity, so we'll have to see how this progresses over time. And the next item here, scan probes on port 9000 TCP. This is actually registered to CS Listener. I'm not exactly sure what CS Listener is. Everybody's shaking their head here. So I did some digging around and did find some commentary, and I'll emphasize this commentary. I haven't verified this information, but they did say that it's possibly associated with the media access port on some closed-circuit TV DVRs. That is what we often refer to generically as security surveillance camera DVRs. Now, we know that there's been a lot of activity to go and exploit these DVRs. This could be, in fact, going after a different product brand or a different product type. And in this particular citation that I found, they did identify a very specific product that was associated with this port. So I think it's credible information. I just didn't have the opportunity to verify it. In any case, these probes, most of these probes are coming from an anonymous hosting service provider in the Netherlands. And so that kind of suggests further, just the fact that it's coming from an anonymous service provider, the hosting provider, suggests perhaps there may be some nefarious aspect underneath the covers here. There has been some sort of regular probing going on in the past, but what we're seeing here is actually a surgence of more significant probing, more probes that are taking place in shorter periods of time and more frequently. Next item here is Stan, you probably weren't born when we saw this originally. But this is a case, Dave, I'm sure Dave remembers. This is port 1434 UDP. That's the Microsoft SQL database. And they're actually, oftentimes we report 1433 probing, doing password guessing attack activity, but this is a particular case that's associated with the traditional, what we've called the slammer worm from some time ago. This was around 2001 or something. It was way back. Yeah. But in this particular case, what we're seeing is, in fact, that telltale sign. It was a 404-byte packet payload that was actually the executable that was able to exploit machines and cause them to go off and scan others. And I think it also provided an avenue to be able to get into the machine also, although that was not the original intent of the slammer worm, if I remember correctly.
But it was UDP, so you didn't have to establish the connection, and that's why it propagated so quickly. It
propagated very, very quickly. In this case, it's not propagating as quickly, but we certainly are seeing some significant activity and very geographically diverse in the sources of activity, which suggests perhaps that there are some unpatched servers of that type that are just kind of scattered about around the globe. Okay, so the next item here, we're going to look at top 10 most probed ports, and this is actually specifically from May 12th. Top of the list here is port 22 TCP. We've been talking about this one, and it's sort of the siblings of that we've been talking about for several weeks now, actually months now, a few months now, are port 23 and port 5000 TCP, all of those associated with devices that are being exploited. We have wedged in there port 445 TCP. And then following that, 3389 TCP, that's remote desktop protocol. We see port 80, port 8080 TCP typically. We just talked about the Microsoft SQL database. In this case, 1433 TCP being probed for most likely password guessing attacks. And then we see 53 UDP, which is probably associated with reflection attack activity or probing around looking for DNS servers. And then last but not least on here, port 443 TCP, which may still be associated with, they may be simply looking for web servers, but could be associated with looking for Heartbleed, the vulnerable servers associated with Heartbleed. The last what we'll look at here is the daily reconnaissance index, and you can certainly see a change in trend in activity over the last year here. This is looking at just a little bit over a year of activity, showing, we had sort of some stability, and then we got some certainly some increase in activity more recently. Not at the peak of what we've seen, but we are seeing still some increased activity taking place. That's our show for today. If you'd like to get in touch with us, you can contact us at threattrack@list.att.com. Our program is available in a variety of places. It's available on the AT&T Tech channel. It's att.com/threattrack. It's also available on YouTube. Just look for the AT&T Tech channel. It's also available on iTunes in an audio-only version. I'd like to thank you guys for joining us this week. Thank you, audience, for joining us again this week. Certainly, we look forward to meeting with you again next week. We'll have another episode, and until then, keep your network safe.